At our church, there was a young man. He's 24 now. He's in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy, and I would push him around on Sundays, and I'd take him outside and roll him around, and we'd just race up and down the parking lot, and he just to see the grin on his face and the joy in his face was it would break your heart. You just loved it.
Mid-South Viewpoint, a Christian news and information feature of Bott Radio Network 640 AM, discussing the news, views, issues, and concerns that affect our community. Join us now for today's edition of Mid-South Viewpoint.
Not only are we coming back, but we've added another week.
Oh, you have a second week?
Yes, we have a second week. We have the same week that we had last year, where we served children and young adults with intellectual disabilities and or autism. And that has become a very popular week. We just have a few openings left in that week of camp for this summer. But we are also going to serve children with chronic illnesses, or children who are blind or visually impaired, and children with Asperger's during a separate week of camp. This will be our 17th summer to serve children with special needs and chronic illnesses in a Christian summer camp setting. What we do in this setting is we help children understand that God has uniquely created every one of us to live a life of ability. We take all the typical activities of summer camp and adapt them to meet each child's needs and show them that they are able to do things in life. They built a new home for our co-founders, Paul and Cindy Tees, and 2 other buildings at a camp, and they did a lot of renovation work that you don't even see in the program at camp. But one of the greatest things that happened out of that is people continue to hear about who we are and what we do as they show reruns of that program. It's kind of fun when we open our email and we have an email from Albania or Russia or France, and all of us will call out when we open the email and say, we were in France last night. Yes, our co-founders, Paul and Cindy Tees, were on staff at Kanakuk Camp. Cindy was the director of health services there. And one summer, a young girl attending camp, Lauren, was coming to the nurse quite often complaining of pain in her leg. And so when that session of camp was over, Cindy visited with her parents and mentioned that to them. So they took Lauren to the doctor when they returned home and discovered that she had bone cancer. She was 11 years old. When they explained to her that they were going to have to remove her leg and she would undergo chemo and some of the things that would be involved with that process, her first question was, "This means I can't go to camp again, doesn't it?" So her mom called Cindy and said, "We have to make camp possible for her. She has to have something to work toward." So they did. They did what they needed to do to make it possible for Lauren to return to camp the next summer, and she did. And it was a good thing, but Cindy could tell it was not what Lauren had hoped it would be. So one afternoon they visited, and Cindy asked her, "Lauren, what can we do to make this better for you?" And Lauren said, "I just wish I could be a normal kid at camp. I wish I could go to camp where everyone's like me." So that night, Cindy was sharing that with her husband, Paul, and Paul said, "Why couldn't there be a camp where Lauren could just be a kid at camp?" And that's the seeds. That's where Camp Barnabas started, and out of that grew our program. This summer, we will serve 1,500 campers at 13 different weeks of camp in 4 different locations around the country. We'll do that with the help of around 2,700 volunteers and 100 summer staff. We'll also, included in that number, that 1,500, are the siblings of children with special needs and chronic diseases, because we have realized how important it is for the whole family, this Barnabas experience. For the siblings, it's an opportunity for them to be with other guys and gals who live the same kind of lifestyle that they live. When there's a child with special needs or chronic illness in a family, just by very nature of their needs, they need extra time with the family, and siblings have to learn to adapt who they are and what they do in that situation. So at camp, they realize they're not the only person who lives that kind of life, and that it's okay. And then the parents, because all of their children are at camp that week, they have a break. For some of our parents, it's the only time that they're ever away from their child with special need or chronic illness. When we look at a camp activity, we don't look at who cannot do it. We look at how to make it possible for everyone to do that. Every camper has a one-on-one volunteer, and that volunteer's job is to make sure that that week of camp is one of the best weeks for that child with special needs. At our Tees Trail Camp, for instance, we have a fully accessible high ropes course, and every child who's age 10 and over, our insurance sets that minimum age limit, can go through the ropes course if they have the courage to do that. Even a child who's born without arms or legs, they are placed in a special harness and taken up the rock wall, hooked onto our zip line, and fly down a 40-foot zip line.
About 8 or 9 years ago, this was a dream of mine to offer a camp in the Memphis area, a camp for children with special needs and disabilities. And I actually drew out a map of how I would like the camp set up, and the cabins and the lake and so forth for canoeing and different activities. And over the years, we became involved with various organizations such as the Autism Center and the Down Syndrome Association. I actually served on their board, and we became very close friends with several families within these organizations. And that dream started to come really to life when I started calling around the country the fall of 2010, and I Googled and found a handful of camps around the country. There's one in California, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and I was talking to these people and getting some ideas about establishing a camp here, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, have you ever looked at Camp Barnabas? They're up around Branson area." So I immediately got home and pulled up the website and called and actually talked to Cindy Teese on the phone at length. This was in November of 2010. And again, we touched base in April that following year. And during that time, in March, I went through a 3-day week of Faith Walk, which is a men's retreat. And I met Neil Philpson, who is the executive director out at the Grove. And he has the same passion and loved the idea of having a camp for children with special needs. And so took that idea and talked to Cindy and Paul about it. They came down the following month, looked around town, and said, "We really like it." And so that's where one of the ways this all came together.
I'm a nurse practitioner, so I knew that I would be able to directly get involved in the medical portion of it. So as Mark was working it out with the Teases to get Camp Barnabas to the Grove, I knew my role was going to be to get all my nurse friends together and see who I could get to help me out there. And so that has been kind of where my niche has been. But since we worked Camp Barnabas last summer, we have just, our passion for kids with special needs has just gone through the roof. It is just such an amazing just experience and something that you take with you. We had our 2 teenagers that volunteered last year as counselors, and they are so excited to sign up and volunteer again. They have more of a desire to sign up for Camp Barnabas than they do to go back to our Guatemala trip. Yeah, they don't even want to go to the beach. So it's so rewarding. One of our first dates, he whipped out his graph of his camp and said, I'm going to do this someday. And I said, that's really something. And to see it actually come to reality, and it came so quickly because Camp Barnabas already had everything together. They came with their staff, and they came with the camp director. It just grew, and now it's doubled. Now there's going to be 2 weeks, and it just feels so good to look at my husband and think, golly, he helped put into motion his dream, and he set that as a goal, and God has put the exact people in his life to make this happen. And this is something that Memphis really needs because it is such a big city, and we are centrally located, around 4 or 5 states that, really have a lot of needs, and this is one of them, just to give kids this opportunity to be able to come out. And it's a beautiful camp. with that lake and our swimming pool. I'd like a swimming pool like at Purdy, but we'll be working on that.
Back at a very early age, when I was growing up, my parents took in foster children. I have a brother that's 3 years younger than myself, and then my parents adopted my little sister, Lori, and then they were involved in the foster care program, and they took in 28 foster children over 8 years, and some of those kids had special needs at that time. And so it's been in my life, and I've been close to a lot of these kids from the time I was 9, 10, 11 years old. And then through the years, as I mentioned, all the way up through at our church, there was a young man. He's 24 now. He's in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy, and I would push him around on Sundays, and I'd take him outside and roll him around, and we'd just race up and down the parking lot, and he just to see the grin on his face and the joy in his face was it would break your heart. You just loved it.
Mark and I, just debated whether or not we were actually going to be foster parents. But as we began talking about that, and that was a discussion over about a year period, we realized that we're too busy to really take in foster children. We would both work full time, and then all of our other kids with their multiple activities. It just didn't seem conducive to bring in a child all of a sudden into our kind of chaotic family. So we thought, well, maybe we'll just permanently bring one and make him part of the chaos. So in a good way, actually. So then we had Bethany Christian Services come to our church and kind of do a little spill about adoption and stuff. And that kind of planted a seed towards the potential to adopt. And then it wasn't until really we worked Camp Barnabas, and I got a full week of personal experience with, in particular, children with Down syndrome, that I realized I would love to have a child with Down syndrome. Mark and I weren't planning on, having any children, but to adopt an orphan, with Down syndrome, we just immediately thought, oh, that's going to be awesome. So we called Bethany, and there weren't any children available domestically. So we said, well, we'll adopt wherever. And the social worker said, well, Hong Kong has a great program, and a lot of their orphans have Down syndrome. I said, perfect. We'll take a kid from Hong Kong. So that's what started it. And then as soon as we filled out the formal application, we got access to the waiting children list. And I mean, you can read the bios and see the pictures of the children, and of course it was prayerfully determined, but we picked out a child that seemed to have a happy-go-lucky personality, and he's got some heart issues and stuff like that, but they don't seem like they're not manageable. So we've sunk our teeth into him, and his name is Sway, and so we're just patiently waiting to bring him home.
One thing that we can tell you about being involved with Camp Barnabas is it changes your life. I have yet to meet a person who has been involved with us in any way, either as a camper or a volunteer or on summer staff, that has not walked away with some type of change in their life. July 15th through the 20th is the week for children with chronic illnesses. And then July 22nd through 27th is the week for children with intellectual disabilities and or autism. There is an online enrollment process to get the information that you need about the camps. You can go to our website, www.campbarnabas.org/Memphis camps. And then you can choose which camp is the best for your child there. There's also information there on how to contact our camp registrar if you have questions. And then you go through the online enrollment process. We also do have scholarships available for our campers. Over 60% of the children who attend one of our programs receives at least a partial scholarship. So no one has ever been turned away from Camp Barnabas for financial need. All of us are there at any time for parents to ask those questions, and we can give them the answers that we hope will reassure them. We know that it's a difficult decision to think about sending your child to an overnight camp, especially a child with special needs or chronic illness. Amanda mentioned that she served last year on the medical staff, and that's one of the things that's very reassuring to our parents. At the Memphis camp, we'll have a physician and 3 to 4 RNs there as a medical team that week to address the needs. When a parent fills out the application online, they give us very detailed information about their child's medical history. They also give us information about the things that help their child feel comfortable. For instance, maybe they sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to their child every night to help them go to sleep. They put that on the application. Then that volunteer who's assigned to that child that week, they come in a day before the campers for specialized training. And one of the things that they do is they learn all of those things about the child that they're going to be serving that week. So we do everything that we can to make the child feel comfortable and for the parents to know as much as possible we're going to keep that child's routine. We're going to respond to that child in the same ways that they respond to the child. We're going to do everything we can to make it the best experience for the camper and for the parent. The Barnabas experience to us is the same no matter where we're having camp because, as I mentioned earlier, for us, the Barnabas experience is helping that child understand that every person is uniquely created to live a life of ability. You're uniquely created, Byron. I'm uniquely created, Mark, Amanda. Every one of our campers has their own uniqueness. So to us, that's the Barnabas experience, is their realization of that as they go through the summer camp activities. So the difference is the location, and it is an incredible location. Beautiful, beautiful campus. All of our volunteers, like I said, arrive a day early and go through special training. They also have an online application process. And if someone's interested in that, they can go to campbarnabas.org/volunteers and click on the individual volunteers button, and they will be able to choose one of the Memphis camps. We do charge a fee for our volunteers to help cover their room and board, and that fee is $175. Most people do that through fundraising, and we find that once they have come, they don't think twice about what it takes to be involved in the Barnabas process. We have a national camp team. All of our summer staff team goes through 10 days of intensive training toward the end of May at our base camp there in Missouri. The national team then travels to all of the camps. There's a director, a leadership team, and then a summer staff person for every cabin at one of our national camps. So in each cabin, there will be a national team staff member. There'll be a one-on-one volunteer for every camper in a cabin. And then there are additional volunteers who are trained to have supportive roles, like a cabin mom or a cabin dad, which I think is what Mark did last summer. And that role is a big encouraging role and just being an extra set of hands in a cabin.
Each cabin, both for the boys and the girls, there's a cabin dad and a cabin mom. And you're responsible for the counselors as well as the campers to make sure, because we have several activities going on throughout the day, whether it be going to the canoes or going to the auditorium or one of my favorite was the balloon slingshot, where we have these huge slingshots and we load up balloons about half the size of a football, and they'll sling about 100 yards. And so as a cabin dad, you keep them on track and clean up messes when there's messes to be made. And but you're right in the middle of it all, which is really exciting. So you're not just standing around watching; you're actually involved in all of it.
Give us an example of maybe something that took place for you during that time as being a cabin dad. Something that stands out to you.
Well, we had an activity in the auditorium, and we had a young gentleman. He walked around all weekend with his little iPods. He had 2 different iPods. When the battery would go dead in one, then he would quickly switch over to the other one. Well, it just so happened that the other one was dead as well, and he did not like that, and he couldn't understand why he wasn't able to listen to his music. And so he got quite upset about that. So we ran around and we managed to find another iPad and let him listen to it through that. And he was quite content. But you better be ready to. You have to be very creative and quick on your feet. You know what? It's just when you see the excitement on their face and the joy, because you're giving these kids an opportunity to do something they've never dreamed of. When I first started looking at this again a couple of years ago, and I Googled summer camps for children with special needs and disabilities, there were several opportunities in Memphis, but they're still in four walls. They go do arts and crafts, they might go to the pool, but they're not able to get outside and do things outdoors that we can offer. And it just, when you see their face light up, and then at the end of the week, when we line the pathway in the cabins, we do the cross carry. We take a large cross, and each cabin carries that cross to the next cabin, and then the next cabin takes it to the next cabin and passes it off. It's the end of a very powerful week.
It is definitely, to me, last summer, Camp Barnabas was the mission of all missions. It was so just impacting to me spiritually and emotionally. As Mark was talking about the cross carry from cabin to cabin, that is extremely emotional time. And when you are listening to a child with cerebral palsy or Down syndrome pray for you, I mean, you just can't help but be blessed by that in the most amazing way. It just speaks volumes, and it literally, I walked away from there with just a whole new perspective on how God sees each and every one of us as special. And you know, I was talking to Mark after camp was over about, you know, when you don't have an obvious special need, there is a lot of, I don't know how to say this, but there's a lot of experiences you have to live through to, you know, be saved and then to live a Christ-like life. And when I look at children with special needs, I think, you know, they're the ones that are more blessed than I am, because there's not that precedence put on them. They're already entering in the kingdom, you know, so they're more perfect than I am. And it's kind of a humbling experience to think the Lord has his hand on these children, these people, and to not want to be a part of their life. That's just a crying shame.
Well, if you have a child with AIDS, or a child who is affected by AIDS or HIV, someone in the family has AIDS or HIV, if you have a child who maybe has suffered a severe burn, or you have a child with cancer or diabetes, sickle cell, cystic fibrosis, any of those chronic illnesses, Fragile X, neurofibromatosis, or any other kind of craniofacial syndrome, or maybe you have a child who's blind, or you have a child with Asperger's, a child with Down syndrome, a child with autism, or any other type of intellectual disability, you can go to campbarnabas.org/Memphis camps and choose the camp that best fits your child and register online. If you have questions, you can call us at 417-476-2565, or you can email us at info@campbarnabas.org. We'll be happy to answer your questions, to walk you through the process. We want your child to have an incredible Barnabas experience at Camp Barnabas Memphis this summer.
Thanks for listening to Mid-South Viewpoint. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can email us. Our address is wcrv@botradionetwork.com. This has been Mid-South Viewpoint, another Christian news and information feature from Bott Radio Network 640 AM.